We've always known mitochondria as the powerhouse of our cells. Are we shortchanging their value with this myopic view? Can human emotions and feelings influence mitochondrial function? These days, we often hear about mitochondrial dysfunction. How do we go about repairing it? Hi, my name is Rishi Kumar and I am a freshman at University of Maryland. As part of my coursework, I had the unique privilege of interviewing Dr. Martin Picard, Associate Professor of Behavioral Medicine in Psychiatry and Neurology at Columbia University School of Medicine, and posing these questions. Although I barely scratched the surface of Dr. Picard's extensive research work, what was evident is how mitochondrial psychobiology is poised to change the future of medicine. Let's dive right into it.
Here we go. So, Dr. Picard, thank you so much for your time today. So, our first question. We hear a lot about mitochondria in health circles now since your pioneering research became public. But how did you become interested in researching mitochondria in the first place?
I think when I was an undergraduate student, I kind of was excited about energy, and I used to do competitive cycling. And so I read and did a lot of work in the area of sports, exercise science and sports psychology, which obviously involves your mitochondria, because the reason you breathe harder when you exercise and move is because your mitochondria are burning more oxygen. So I think I had this kind of basic connection with energy and biological, energy transformation processes. And then when I transitioned into graduate school, I met this professor, Tania Taivasalo, who was an expert in mitochondrial disease. And I worked with her for the summer, and I fell in love with mitochondria. I just felt like something really important, there was around mitochondrial science, and eventually it would be a way to integrate mind and body processes.
So next up, what did it feel like to see mitochondria under an electron microscope for the first time?
Oh, so beautiful. They're gorgeous. You see the complexity and their beauty there. They're so diverse. So you look at a mitochondrion from a cardiac cell, right, and from the heart, and they have so many cristae that are densely packed. They're all linear, lamellar cristae, and then you see mitochondria in skeletal muscle. And we did a lot of work on human muscle biopsies. You can take piece of the quad, the quadricep muscle from the thigh, and then put this under the microscope. You see the beautiful mitochondria. Some are rounded like little spheres, some are elongated. So I think I felt really excited. Like you could see the inner, transformer, to use Nick Lane's recent book title, where energy is transduced. This is where chemistry is transformed into electricity, and then this gives us the ability to think and feel and respond and live. So it was really exciting. So I spent many hours at the electron microscope looking at different types of mitochondria from mice, and from cultured cells.
Yeah, and that seems really fun. I think you're the first lab I've heard of that actually views like this type of organelle under a microscope, and I'm just wow. So in addition to viewing under the microscope, in your paper Mitochondrial Signal Transduction from last year, you started off with the analogy of mitochondria as powerhouses has expired. Could you please explain why?
Analogies are really powerful because they tap into this common knowledge bank that we all have, right? So if you use a good analogy, then anyone you talk to, right away, you put them into the right mental frame to understand what you're talking about. So you can convey really complex ideas with good analogies and good metaphors. But by doing that, you do put your audience or the person you're speaking to in a very narrow and specific mind space. What does a powerhouse do, right? It transforms energy. That's all it does. It takes water movement or coal burning, heat, and it turns that into electricity. And that's the only thing a powerhouse does. If you look at mitochondria, there are small living, microorganisms. They're small living creatures inside every one of your cell. And they transform energy for sure, but they also have a life cycle. Like new ones are born, old ones die. They fuse with one another. They, fizz. They have this whole social, dynamics inside the cell. They receive information. They process information a bit like a neural network, and then they produce signals that change gene expression. And so they talk to each other. They talk to other organelles. They talk to the rest of the body. So this is way beyond what a powerhouse will ever do. And they have their own genome, and they're regulated in many complex processes. So then the powerhouse just becomes a really restrictive thinking framework. And then as an analogy, it's expired because we know that mitochondria are so much more than powerhouses nowadays. So I think continuing to use that analogy is actually damaging to new people coming into the field, and it just limits the spectrum or the range of possibilities that when we start to think about how do mitochondria support health, and how are they involved in diseases. And I think thinking about them as powerhouses is misleading.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, I honestly can't imagine a battery doing everything you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So in your paper, Multifaceted Mitochondria, you put a spin on the familiar blind men and the elephant analogy, where you gave them white coats. What is the integrative dynamic approach to mitochondrial research that you're referring to in that paper?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're really good as scientists. We're trained. If you go through undergraduate and then graduate training, and kind of you're part of the academic, machine, you are almost invariably drawn and taught to that reductionism is the ultimate way of doing science. And reductionism has done a lot for science and for biology in particular, and for medicine. And this is what we do when we take a microscope, right? And then you kill the mitochondria, and you kill the cell, you fix it in time and space, and then you can zoom in, and then you draw inference and conclusions based on like what you see there in the fixed inanimate state. And if you take an ATP detector, right, then you assess the powerhouse function of mitochondria, but none of the other functions. And if you take a respirometer, you measure oxygen consumption, then you measure mitochondrial respiration. If you use another probe for like calcium, then you study mitochondria as an ion sink and signaling organelle. And so whatever approach we take, they're all reductionist approach. And to tap into the inner biology of mitochondria, we need to take those reductionist approaches. What this paper calls for is a holistic perspective of mitochondria, where we can use and draw from the best of reductionist mitochondrial science we have, and what everything molecular biology has to offer. But then you zoom out, and then you say, ooh, the whole organelle is so much more complex. It's a family of diverse genetically related organelles. They perform all of these functions and behaviors, and those functions and behaviors are enabled by static features and the pieces that we can measure with the beautiful tools of reductionism and molecular biology. But it's taking that approach of understanding mitochondria as a dynamic, recalibrating biological entity. And when you start to see mitochondria that way, then it becomes a lot clearer, I think, and more intuitive that they would contribute to life and health, not just by producing ATP, but by transducing information. And energy is just one form of information.
That is such a great description of what mitochondria are able to do. And in terms of mitochondria, I know you've had quite a focus in psychiatry. So in terms of mitochondria, how are mental and metabolic health related?
That is a question I wish we had a really good answer for. We're working on this. Many other people are working on this. I think it's what's part of the developing field of metabolic psychiatry, right? Trying to understand the metabolic and bioenergetic dimension of mental health. And we approach this. I think there's a lot of biomedical science is focused on disease. And often when we talk about mental health, what we actually talk about are mental illness. And most of biomedical sciences and what the National Institute of Health, NIH, right, funds is mostly disease research. It's not very little of it is about health. So most of our framework for biomedical science is disease centric. And even what we call healthcare is actually disease care. Everything a doctor is taught, in medical school is about disease, and there's very little knowledge and very little framework and theory around like what is human health. How do you measure this? How do you quantify human health?
You're so right.
So we've taken an approach that's a little different than the psychiatry angle, and mostly what we do is mitochondrial psychobiology, which aims to connect the subjective psychological states that we experience, which makes us humans, what we feel and experience, and how this connects to molecular and energetic processes inside mitochondria. So there's a lot to discover there. And we've published some work, others have published some work linking subjective experiences like stress or feeling, positive emotions like love, closeness, and trust, and sense of purpose in life. And this is associated with some aspects of mitochondrial biology. So there's a lot more work to be done there. But I think in the last 5 years, there's promising findings that are suggesting that there's something real there. And I think from an evolutionary perspective, from a biological or psychobiological perspective, we are mind-body units, right? We are there's both of these things are part of who we are. So it makes sense, I think, that the fundamental element of what we are, which is flowing energy through your mitochondria, would be connected to how you feel. Because I think, evolutionary speaking, this needs to happen. You need to match the flow of energy in your body with what you're experiencing in your mind. So it's a big open area of research at the moment.
So I just want to move on to this one. Mitochondria have their own DNA, but once again, it's very small. So what are the real life implications of mitochondrial DNA?
There's only 37 genes on the mitochondrial DNA in humans. Of those 37, there's 13 that code for proteins, right? DNA makes RNA, and then RNA makes protein, and those 13 proteins are all proteins and subunits of the electron transport chain, which they take electrons from the carbon food substrate that you eat, right? The carbohydrates, the lipids, and the proteins. The mitochondria have this special sequence of enzymes that you probably know about, the TCA cycle, right? The Krebs cycle. And then in the Krebs cycle, enzymes there rip off electrons from the carbon backbone of food substrates. And then the electron is put onto a reducing equivalent carrier, then injected into complex 1 and complex 2. And then electrons start flowing. And the flow of electrons through the electron transport chain is what charges mitochondria, right? It's where the chemical energy turns into electrical energy, and then electrons flow and then produce that charge and then end up on oxygen, which is the purpose of breathing, is to bring oxygen to complex 4. So the electrons can flow from 1, 3, 4 or 2, 3, 4. So the mitochondrial DNA is really critical for that. I think that's number one, and that's kind of what you see in the textbook. And then in the last 5 or so years, there's been a lot of work looking at mitochondrial DNA as a signaling molecule. And others have proposed that mitochondrial DNA might be a really powerful signaling agent, both inside the cell, but also outside the cell in the bloodstream, for example. And there's really convincing work demonstrating that if mitochondria release pieces or their whole DNA inside the cytoplasm, this is a really important thing for the cell to know about. And then there are a number of DNA sensing enzymes in the cytoplasm that convert that signal, that mitochondrial DNA in the cytoplasm, into powerful nuclear gene expression programs. And I think mitochondrial DNA is likely to have a dual role, and maybe more, but at least two. One, in encoding pieces of the electron transport chain to energize life, and then two, as a signaling molecule. And we know also mitochondrial DNA can translocate and be integrated like a virus inside the nuclear genome. These are called nuclear mitochondrial DNA insertions. This is
That's
like
very interesting.
yeah, it's crazy stuff. But it's like horizontal gene transfer, the same way, bacteria and viruses, you can have pieces of viral DNA get integrated as retroviruses inside the host genome, and then they start to replicate. So mitochondrial DNA gets incorporated inside the mammalian genome. This seems to happen as we age. Like inside your body, you have pieces of mitochondrial DNA that go inside your nucleus and change the nuclear sequence pretty much. And this seems to happen more frequently in the brain than in the blood cells. So this is very new. We have a paper under review that describes this. But this is real. Mitochondria signaling and through a variety of ways.
Yeah, I did not know at all about DNA jumping from the mitochondria into the nucleus.
Mm-hmm.
So so another question. You've talked about harnessing the placebo effect in healthcare. How do human emotions and feelings influence mitochondrial function?
That's a great question. The placebo, I think and this huge field of placebo research that a lot of amazing scientists have developed over the last many decades shows that the human mind, through the power of intention or suggestion, can change biology in really profound ways. And there's kind of a few areas that have demonstrated this, more clearly than others. For example, with pain or with, the immune system seems to be quite well tuned to how you feel, probably for good evolutionary reasons. So when I say harnessing the placebo effect, I'm referring to the understanding the mind mitochondria connection, or the mind body connection. And the body mind unit has the amazing capacity to remain healthy for decades. It's pretty amazing when, everything that can go wrong and the mutations that accumulate and the stochasticity that happens inside the cell, somehow the whole system can stay healthy for decades. And when things go wrong and you're injured, for example, then the body has the ability to heal, and the mind has the ability to heal, together with the body. So this is what I think we need to understand better. And how does the mind connect with mitochondria, I think is a question that you will be studying for the remaining years probably of my career. There's a lot of things to discover there. Probably the way in which this happens, to simplify, is you feel and experience some things, right? Like you feel inspired, or you feel love and closeness, and you feel connected to other people and to the world and something greater than yourself maybe. This has your body needs to know about this. It needs to know that you're feeling safe and in a good position, and then that it can allocate energetic resources to healing and to keeping you well. On the flip side, if you feel like the world is a dangerous place, and you get this angry email, and you have this interaction with someone, and you just feel threatened, like your sense of self, or if back in the days you live in the jungle and there's a tiger that gets at you, like you need to worry for your life. And then the body needs to reallocate, and the mind needs to reallocate energy towards like your heart, and you're contracting muscles and fight or flight. But these two states of being safe and kind of in this restorative state, which basically sleep is like the ultimate state of like relaxation and pro healing probably, and this like opposite state of being afraid and worried and anxious. This is something that so these subjective experiences need to be matched by the right biology, and this is probably why we have a brain to kind of mediate that connection, right? The brain integrates all the inputs, and then it says, okay, danger, let me release stress hormones, let me mobilize glucose, let me shut down the immune system. So the brain has the capacity and kind of a veto on a lot of our physiology. So the mind, acting through the brain and through the hormones and nervous system, innervating all sorts of organs, has the ability to shift metabolism and to shift physiological functions. And then those hormones can act on cellular receptors, and then those can act on mitochondria. And there are also more direct connections. Mitochondria express receptors for many stress hormones and other important like sex hormones as well. So mitochondria can sense signals from the brain, and that's probably one of the main mechanisms, at least from what we know, to this date, that connect the mind to mitochondria.
That was a great answer, and some very interesting commentary you have there. So I just wanted to mention that in my honors program, I'm taking a first semester course on genomics. And however, contrary to this popular belief of genomics and genetic causes, many metabolic diseases do have mitochondrial dysfunction as their root cause. How can one go about restoring proper mitochondrial function?
Mm-hmm. So mitochondrial functions, there are many functions to to mitochondria.
Thanks for correcting me right there.
Yeah, mitochondrial, as an analogy, we never speak in terms of like human function, right? Or like cellular function. Like which function are you talking about? If you're a cell biologist, it makes a big difference if you're talking about making antibodies or secreting proteins, or you talk about contraction, or you talk about cell division. These are all functions, right? So we've simplified the world of mitochondrial biology to mitochondrial function and dysfunction, which is kind of convenient in conversation, but I think it obscures the beautiful and important complexity of mitochondrial biology. So what can we do to improve how mitochondria behave and the set of mitochondrial functions? And let's cast this as mitochondrial health. There are three ways, probably. Two we know very well. One that is a bit more speculative. The first is moving. Physical activity, we know very well, can stimulate the production of new mitochondria, or biogenesis. The genesis of new mitochondria is called mitochondrial biogenesis. If you move and you're physically active and you do exercise, then the body says, "Whoo, I better make more mitochondria so that I'm ready next time." This mind-body thing wants to to be vigorous. So exercise is one. Not eating too much. It's probably number two is probably an important contributor to mitochondrial health. If you overeat, particularly sugars, then mitochondria are kind of put on the sideline, and you can metabolize a lot of sugars without involving by involving other pathways that are not only mitochondria. If you only eat lipids, for example, like if you are on a ketogenic diet, which has been shown to be, as a positive adjuvant, if not main treatment for some people with psychiatric disorders, you're forced to use your mitochondria. You can't use other pathways. So not eating too much, calls upon those metabolic pathways that force mitochondrial metabolism. And the third that we're exploring now, and I think there's a few lines of evidence that point towards, is like making choices in your life that allows you to live a meaningful, inspiring life, surrounding yourself by people who you connect with, and so on, seems to have a positive effect on a number of biological and psychological features, including perhaps your mitochondria. So if that's indeed the case, then maybe this is something we can actually do, and do what we can to encourage and support, sustain good psychosocial factors in our environment, and maybe this has a positive effect on our mitochondria.
Yes, and I just wanted to bring up a popular belief that people in biology have. So mitochondria and mitochondrial DNA are inherited from the mother, that actually being because the mitochondria in the sperm will disintegrate after fertilization. Does that also mean that mitochondrial dysfunction-related diseases are maternally inherited?
They are, yep, exactly. And we see patients in the clinic who, have inherited from their mother, never from the father, right? We all have our mom's mitochondria and our mom's mitochondrial DNA. And those patients have maternally inherited genetic mitochondrial diseases.
No, but I'm not necessarily on that track. I'm thinking about like mitochondrial dysfunction, like diseases that are tied to mitochondrial dysfunction and maybe more related to lifestyle.
Oh, I
Are they
see.
more likely to be inherited from the mother?
Um, there is evidence, for example, that longevity is more strongly maternally inherited. So if your mom lived longer, then you have a better chance of living longer than if your dad lived longer. And that might be because mitochondria play a big role in how long you live. Um, and I think what becomes important here is to say, well, okay, you've inherited some things from mom and dad. You've inherited your mitochondria from your mom. How much of a role does this play in your ability to stay healthy and live a long, fulfilling life versus the choices you make, the behaviors you have, and the state that you are in, throughout your life. And my sense at this point, based on like good genetic studies of nuclear DNA and so on, there's probably like 10% of longevity and health that is genetically driven, and probably 90% that is other things, including psychobiological factors and behaviors and so on. So I think that the genetic contributions are minimal when we talk about chronic illnesses and longevity and so on. And there are rare genetic disorders where the penetrance is 100%. If you have this genetic defect, you're going to get sick. For the majority of people, that is not the case. And the vast majority of the effect size of what actually moves the needles on people's health is not genetic.
Yes, that's what I was looking for, because mitochondrial dysfunction, I'm thinking more on the lifestyle side, or things that some of the more common diseases that are the result of mitochondrial dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our last question for today. How do you think your research will transform the future of medicine, and how should we as aspiring physicians prepare for it?
Mm-hmm. Love it. What do we want medicine to look like 100 years from now? Right? What? Yeah, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is sort of broken with the whole disease care. Like healthcare is pretty much disease care, like too much of a focus on disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
And
think
we need to sort of step away from that.
yes. And to step away from that, we need to have a really good alternative. And at the moment, we don't. So I think we need a science of health. We need to build like the scientific foundation for understanding what health is. And then we need to have ways to quantify, to measure health. So you can go to your doctor or to, the health provider of the future. Might not be from the same line, the same, descendants from our, today's doctors, which are very well entrenched in molecular cause of disease and don't care or have much incentive to care about health. So I don't know kind of where this is going to emerge from, but I think what we need 100 years from now, we need to have a medicine that is focused on health. And by understanding the mind mitochondria connection, I think this is a framework to build a more accurate, a more comprehensive. There are real biological causes of disease, right? And then there are real, genetic contributions to disease risk and so on. But what about all the other stuff? And what about, people who can heal their chronic pain with a placebo pill? And there's a lot of things that are not part of the current framework. They're not part of the current dialogue. Doctors aren't trained, to care and understand this. We want to kind of achieve personalized medicine, but we know nothing or very little about each person and how, energy flows in each person's mind and body. And the mind is able of like completely transforming, your heart rate and the secreted hormones and your sleep patterns and so on. And that's just not part of how we think about health and medicine. So something is weird, something is off. And now that we know how off we are, I think understanding real mechanisms and connections that support health, including the mind mitochondria connection, will help us, develop a framework that we can actually shift to. So I hope what we do in the next few decades will contribute to a brighter future for medicine.
So thank you so very much, Dr. Picard.
My pleasure. This is you're asking a lot of good, important questions. Thank you for asking those questions and engaging in those dialogues.
To learn more about Dr. Picard's groundbreaking research work, visit picardlab.org. Thank you.